The stage came in at 2:30, which was late, and dusty enough that the horse's legs were gray to the knee. Harlan's Crossing was not much to arrive at. A main street of packed dirt, a general store with a warped awning, a livery that smelled of hay and rot, a church whose bell had not rung in 3 Sundays. The platform was just a strip of planking beside the road, and there was no one official standing on it. There rarely was. The town had learned that if you wanted to see who got off the stage, you simply looked. There was only one passenger. She came down the iron step with her traveling bag over one arm and a leather notebook tucked against her ribs, as though she had been holding it there the whole journey from Billings. She was perhaps 25 or 26, and she stood in the particular way of someone who has been raised to take up exactly as much space as she requires and no more. Her dress was dark wool, practical, and showing the kind of wear that is not poverty but travel. Her hair was pale and pinned close. The stage driver set a single trunk down in the dust beside her. He said something she answered in a word, and he climbed back up without looking at her again. She stood with the trunk at her feet and the street in front of her, and the whole of Harlan's Crossing arranged on either side of it. The woman at the general store had come to stand in the doorway. 2 men at the livery had gone quiet. A child pressed her face against the window of the milliner's shop and left a smear of breath on the glass. Everyone looked, and no one moved. She did not look at any of them. She looked down the length of the street as though she were taking a measurement, and her expression was level and without distress. There was a workshop at the far end of the street, a wide-fronted building with fresh sawdust on the ground outside it, and half a room in linen. He was watching the same way the others were watching, but when the stage driver climbed back up and the horses moved and everyone else stayed where they were, he pushed off the doorframe. He crossed the street. He did not hurry. He walked the way men walk when they have already decided something and are simply covering the distance. He stopped in front of the trunk. He looked at it, then at her. She looked back at him. Her grip on the leather notebook did not change. He said, "I have a roof that needs finishing." She said, "I know what a roof is." He did not dress the offer up. There was a roof, he said, half done. He had torn his shoulder in August trying to finish it alone. A rotator cuff, the doctor in Billings had told him, though what that meant in practical terms was that he could lift, could carry, could drive a nail at waist height, but could not raise his arm above his head without the kind of pain that made a man stop and breathe through his teeth. The freeze would come in October. If the roof was not closed before then, the workshop would take water all winter. Room and board, he said. The loft above the shop. No wages. She had been listening the way she listened to everything, with her eyes on the object in question, not on the person speaking. She was looking at the workshop across the street, at the line where new cedar shingles stopped and old ones began, roughly 2/3 of the way up the left slope of the gable. She could see from here that the pitch was moderate, workable, that the ridgeline ran clean, that whoever had laid the new shingles had done it right, had not rushed, had kept the courses level. She was doing arithmetic that had nothing to do with numbers. She said yes. He picked up one end of her trunk. She picked up the other, without being asked. They carried it across the street. Her shavings and old lantern oil. There was a cot against the north wall, a washstand, a single hook on the beam for hanging clothes, a small window that faced west, and through it the particular amber of a September evening settling over the roofline of the saloon. She set her notebook on the sill. She did not unpack anything else. Below her, through the plank floor, she heard the sounds of supper, the clink of a ladle against a pot, a chair pulled out, a child's voice, high, not unhappy, asking something she couldn't make out. The man's answer, low, a few words, then quiet, then the sound of eating. She sat on the edge of the cot and listened to the life below the floor, the way you listen to weather, not with attention exactly, but with the body's awareness of what surrounds it. The girl's voice came again, slightly louder. She heard the word up. She heard it clearly enough to be certain. The child had asked about something up. The loft, perhaps, or whoever was in it. The man's answer was too quiet to hear. Then, nothing for a long time except the small sounds of a meal ending. A plate moved. A chair shifted back. The steady, unhurried business of two people at a table who had learned to be enough for each other. She was on the roof before the light had fully arrived. The sky was the color of ash still, the mountains to the west not yet visible, and the town below sat quiet in the way only very early morning allows. No smoke from the chimneys, no sound from the livery, the street empty in both directions. She had pulled on her work clothes in the dark, climbed down from the loft by feel, and found the ladder where she had left it, leaning against the workshop eave. The girl was standing at the base of the ladder in her nightgown with bare feet in the dust, looking up with an expression that was not startled, simply considering. She crouched at the eave and looked down. The girl did not step back. "What are the numbers for?" Her voice was matter of fact, not shy, not performing boldness either. A child who had learned that asking was more efficient than waiting. She held the chalk line out so the girl could see it. "To make the line straight," she said. "If the line is not straight, nothing else is straight after it." The girl looked at it for a moment. "Can I come up?" She glanced toward the workshop door. Closed, she looked back down. "Can you climb a ladder?" The girl was already climbing. She was 7, and she moved like she had no awareness of height, which was perhaps the only terrifying thing about her. She arrived at the roofline and crouched beside the woman in her nightgown, without any apparent concern for the drop behind her, and looked at the chalk line, and then at the row of finished shingles, and then at the row still to be laid. "Show me," she said. So she showed her. She stretched the line between 2 nails, let the girl hold one end, and walked the distance to show her how a straight reference makes every measurement after it reliable. She let her snap it once, the quick flat sound of chalk on rough wood, and the blue line that remained, perfect and exact. The girl looked at it for a long time. "My father does that," she said, "with a different line. Most carpenters do. He didn't do the roof, though." "No," she said, "his shoulder." The girl nodded as if this explained something she had already known. It was only then that she saw him. He was standing at the corner of the workshop with a coffee. The way a person watches something they had not expected to see, and are in no hurry to interrupt, and will not speak of later unless asked. The girl snapped the chalk line again. He didn't say anything about what he'd seen on the roof. She had expected something, a word at supper, a nod of acknowledgement, some small indication that the morning had registered. Nothing came. He set the plate on the table, poured the coffee, and sat across from his daughter while she talked about the chalk line. He listened to her. Occasionally he looked up. When he looked up, he did not look at her. She took this as its own kind of answer and let it go. By day 12, she had found her sequence. Ridge to eave, left side to right. She began each morning at the highest course and worked downward, each row overlapping the one below by a third, each nail set at the angle that would hold through freeze and thaw both. She did not rush. Rushing was how you got gaps, and gaps were how you got rot, and rot was the whole conversation you would have 5 years later about why you needed a new roof instead of just a better first one. She had learned this from her father. He had said it once and never repeated it, which meant he considered it obvious and worth saying only once. She agreed with him. The carpenter came out on the 11th morning and watched her for a while from the ground. She was aware of him without turning. She set a nail, 2 strikes to seat it, 1 to drive it true, and moved to the next, then the next. He went back inside without speaking. That afternoon she noticed he had stopped making the particular sound he made when he heard her on the roof. She had catalogued it without meaning to, a brief stillness in whatever he was doing below. Several days. She had understood what it meant. He'd seen people work a roof badly, and he was listening for the sound of it going wrong. By afternoon of day 11, the pauses had stopped. She noticed. She did not comment. At the general store 2 days later, she came in for more nails. 80-penny galvanized. She asked for them by name and count, and the woman behind the counter measured her for a moment before going to the back. There was another woman in the store, browsing bolts of cloth at the far end. She kept browsing. The woman behind the counter returned with the nails wrapped in paper and set them on the wood without meeting her eyes. She paid and left. The door had not fully closed when she heard it. Quiet, not intended to carry, but the walls of a small building have their own acoustics. Works like a man, but quieter. She walked back toward the workshop. The sky had gone flat and pale at the edges, the particular color that meant the temperature would drop overnight. She looked at the roof. She counted the rows still to be laid. The rotting had been there before she arrived. She had seen it on her second day in town, walking back from the water pump with a full bucket, her eyes moving across the platform the way they always moved across wood, not looking for it exactly, but registering it the way a person fluent in a language registers a grammatical error mid-sentence, involuntarily and completely. The outer joist had gone soft at the corner. The decking boards above it had begun to follow. Someone had laid a flat stone over the worst of it, the way people lay stones over problems they are not ready to name. The stone had been there long enough to leave a shadow of discoloration around its edges. She did not say anything. She finished what she was doing and went back to the roof. But she measured had taught her, with her eye and her stride, the distance from joist to joist, the degree of sag in the decking. He had believed that a man who needed a tape measure for every assessment was still learning. She was still learning, always, but she had learned enough. Sunday came gray and cold, the sky the color of a wet slate roof. She was on the platform at first light, with 2 lengths of Douglas fir she had cut the evening before, a pry bar, her hammer, and a paper sack of joist hanger nails. She had asked no one. There was no one awake to ask. The work was straightforward, more so than the roof, which required her to hold both position and precision simultaneously. A platform joist was honest labor. Lever out the rotted section, seat the new timber, nail the hangers, relay the decking boards. The wood she had selected was tight-grained. She had run her thumbnail along it at the mill to check for green. It was not green. She was setting the last board when she heard the door. The woman who ran the general store stood in the frame in her day clothes, a ring of keys in one hand. She had come early to open, or she had seen the light, or both. She stood there and looked at what had been done and what was being finished. Neither of them spoke. There was a pause of some length, long enough that a bird crossed the eave overhead and was gone. Then the woman went back inside. She drove the last 3 nails. She was pulling the pry bar from the soft rot she had removed, setting it aside for burning, when the door opened again. The woman set a glass of water on the new decking and went back inside without a word. She looked at the glass. The wood beneath it was pale and tight and solid. She drank it. The physician's office was one who has lived somewhere her whole life. She had not expected to learn it mattered. She heard them come back across the street that afternoon, the carpenter's boots on the boards, slower than usual, and the girl's quicker step beside them. She was on the workshop roof. She did not look down. She set a shingle and drove the nail and set another. That evening, he ate with his right arm close to his body. She had noticed it before, the way he reached for things without lifting his elbow above the table. The way he turned sideways to take a pan from the hook. Small adjustments that had been going on since before she arrived, that she had read as habit rather than limitation. She looked at the way he held his fork. She looked at the ceiling instead. The girl talked about a cat that had taken up residence beneath the schoolhouse steps. After supper, he sat with his hand flat on the table, and she cleared the plates, and nothing was said about the physician, or the afternoon, or what months meant against a calendar that was already running. She counted back from October. 30 days, give or take. The shoulder would need 3 times that. She did not say it. In the morning she was up before light. She heard him below. A single sound, a careful movement, and then a silence that was not sleep. She lay still in the loft, and listened to him not move, and understood that the stillness was not rest. She was pulling on her boots when she heard the first strike of a hammer. It was not loud, one stroke, and then a pause, and then another. The specific rhythm of someone fitting rather than driving, working with attention. She laced the second boot and climbed down. He was at the bottom of the loft staircase. One step from the bottom had been soft for days. She had learned to step to the outside edge to avoid. His shoulder never rose. She stood at the top and watched him work. He did not look up. He set the shim, tapped it once to check for rock, and drove the first nail with 2 careful strokes, then the second. Then he stood and tested the step with his weight, and it held without sound. He picked up the hammer and the spare cedar and walked back into the workshop without a word. She came down the staircase. Her foot found the repaired step, solid, not a fraction of give. She went to start the fire for breakfast. The cold came on a Wednesday. Not the freeze, something shorter, angrier, a front pushing down from the north, with enough teeth to make the point. The temperature dropped 17 degrees between noon and supper time. By morning there was frost on the grass, and the sky had the low white quality that meant intention. She was on the roof before full light. The shingles she had laid the week prior had contracted overnight, tight and clean. She ran her thumb along each seam by feel, and found nothing loose. Good wood, fitted right, does not move when the cold comes. It holds because the joints were made to hold. She worked without stopping. Her hands were cold, but her hands were always cold in the mornings, and she had learned not to count on warmth until midday. She drove nails with both arms level, never overhead, the way she had watched him manage his shoulder. It was faster this way, too. The mallet swings were shorter, less wasted motion. Around mid-morning, the girl appeared at the base of the ladder. She had a tin pail with a cloth over the top, and she set it on the second rung and called up that breakfast was there if she wanted it. She called it breakfast, but it was closer to 11 o'clock. She climbed down pieces of cold ham. The girl had sat herself on the fence rail nearby. She watched without pretending not to. She handed the cloth back folded. The girl took the pail and went inside, without making it a departure. Just a direction change, the way children do. The second day was harder. The wind came with the cold now, not fierce but constant, the kind that finds every gap in a coat. She shingled into it with her back angled to block what she could. The east face was the exposed face. She had known it would be the difficult side, and she had saved it deliberately. She needed the practice of the other faces before she trusted herself here. By the end of the second afternoon, the front had moved through. The sky opened up. The temperature did not climb back, but the wind quit, and that was enough. She set the last tool down on the decking and looked at what was left. 6 shingles. The final 6. East face, high corner. The most visible corner from the main road. She sat with that for a moment. The cold had taken 2 days from her, and the calendar had not moved to accommodate it. She did not count backwards again. She had already counted, and knew the number, and counting twice did not change it. 6 shingles, 11 days. She picked up the mallet and went down for supper. The rain came in the night. She heard it before first light, not the hard drumming of a storm, but the steady, patient kind that means a full day, maybe 2. The sound of it on the loft roof above her was different from the sound on a finished surface. She could hear the places the decking needed sealing. She had known they were there. She filed it away and lay still until the gray came up in the outside to something flat and even. She cleared a space at the end of the workbench. Shavings, 2 stray nails, a spoke shave he had left with the blade angled up, and set the notebook down. Opened it to the section she had been building out across the last week. Not the roof, the bell housing bracket at the church. She had not been commissioned to think about it. She had looked at it once, passing, and the look had been enough. The bracket was wrought iron, bolted to a timber housing that had rotted at the joint where the metal met the wood. The bell still hung. The bolt still held, but the wood around it was moving with each ring, and wood that moved in one season cracked in the next. She worked through the measurements she had paced out on 3 separate mornings, fitting them into diagrams in the notebook's back pages. Her father had taught her that every repair began as a drawing, that you built it in pencil before you built it in timber, and the pencil version cost nothing to get wrong. She was refining the timber dimensions for the replacement housing when she heard him come through from the back. He did not announce himself. He came in from the rain with his coat darkened at the shoulders and his hair damp, carrying a length of trim he had been storing in the lean-to. He crossed to his bench. She did not look up. He passed behind her once, looking for something in a drawer. He stopped. She felt the pause, the way you feel a sound that suddenly stops. Not a presence, but an absence of ordinary movement. She did not close the notebook. She did not look up. He stood there for what might have been 3 seconds or 10. She could not have said. She kept her pencil moving through a dimension mark on the timber face, the line clean and even. Then he reached past her, not reaching over, but beside, open pages. He went back to his bench. The rain kept on. The lamp burned steady. She turned to the next page and kept drawing. The schoolhouse sat at the north end of the main street, set back from the road by a width of packed dirt that turned to mud when it rained. She had noticed the window frames in her second week, the way the morning light caught the gaps between the wood and the sill, the way the putty had cracked and pulled away in long strips like dried skin. She had measured them with her eyes before she measured them with her hands. She started on a Wednesday, before first light. She brought her own tools in a canvas sack and worked by lantern until the sky grayed enough to see without it. The frames were pine, which was the wrong wood for a building that caught the north wind. But pine was what had been used, and pine was what she had. She cut the new stops from a length she had left over from the loading platform. The fit required 4 separate passes with the block plane, she counted them, before the frame seated without rattle. The second morning she brought linseed oil and a rag cut from an old shirt. She worked it into the new wood slowly, the way her father had taught her, letting the grain pull it in before applying the next coat. The smell of it rose in the cold air. By the time the first children appeared at the far end of the road, she was packing her tools. The schoolteacher came out before the children reached the door. She was a small woman, somewhere in her 40s, with a face that had learned to hold its conclusions until all the evidence was in. She looked at the woman with the canvas sack over her shoulder. Then she looked at the window frames. She ran her thumb along the nearest joint. She pressed the frame at its corner. Nothing moved. She said, "Who authorized this?" Across the joint in the other direction. The children were filing past now, ducking around the 2 women, without much interest, intent on the door and the warmth behind it. The teacher's hand came away from the frame. She had a small notebook of her own in her coat pocket, the kind used for attendance and minor infractions. She had taken it out at some point without the woman noticing. She looked at it, then she put it back. She went inside without saying anything else. The woman walked back toward the main street. The cold had settled in overnight, and it had not lifted. She could see her breath. She counted the days without meaning to. She had stopped trying not to. 19. 19 days. She said the number once, to the cold air, and then let it go. The roof had 2 sections left. She had calculated it that morning, lying in the loft before the light came through fully, running the numbers in her head the way her father had taught her, not as arithmetic but as sequence, one thing following the next in the only order that made sense. 2 days of good weather, maybe 3, if the morning frost slowed the cedar's take. She picked up her mallet at first light and climbed. By mid-morning she had found a rhythm. The town moved below her in its ordinary way, the general store opening, the livery coughing to life, smoke coming up from the boarding house chimney in a thin white column. She did not watch it closely, but she was aware of it the way you are aware of a fire when you are working near one. At noon, she climbed down for water. There was a plate on the workshop step, a cloth laid over it, folded at the corners and tucked under. She stood and looked at it for a moment. Cornbread, still warm, a hard-boiled egg. She did not know which house it had come from. He said he had set aside 4 lengths of good cedar, not the standard stock, the tight-grained stuff from the back. Said she might as well have them, since he had been keeping them, and no one else was likely to know what to do with them. He said it as though this were a practical matter of inventory. She thanked him and he went back inside. She carried the cedar to the workshop herself, 1 length at a time. The carpenter was at his bench when she came in with the last piece. He watched her set it down. He did not say anything. She went back out and up the ladder. But she knew he was watching. Not her work. He had stopped evaluating her work some time ago. He was watching the way you watch a thing you have been trying to name and have finally found the word for. He stood at the workshop door for a moment, with his good hand resting on the frame. The plate from the step was gone. The cedar was stacked neatly against the wall. From the boarding house 3 doors down, someone had hung a new shingle. The old one had been loose for weeks. She had mentioned it to no one, and it was straight and properly set. He went back to his bench. He sat for a long time without picking up a tool. The last shingle went down at 20 minutes past noon. She did not mark the moment. There was no moment to mark, just the mallet coming down on the nail set, the cedar settling flush, and then no more cedar left to set. She held the mallet in her lap and looked at the nail head. It was even with the surface. Not proud, not countersunk. Even. She set the mallet down on the peak beside her. The roof ran away from her on both sides. 41 courses of shingle from the eaves to the ridge, each one overlapping the last by a third. She had cut the hip returns herself, had fit unless something came down on it that no one could build against. Below her, Harlan's Crossing was going about its noon. The woman at the general store had set a crate outside the front door. 2 men she did not know the names of were talking near the livery gate, one of them holding a horse by the bridle. Smoke was coming from the schoolhouse chimney. They had started the stove that morning, the first time this season. She could see the bell housing from here, the bracket she had remounted in August, sitting quiet and level in its place. She could see the loading platform. The new boards had gone a different color than the old ones, still pale, not yet weathered. By spring they would match. She stayed on the peak. Her trunk was in the loft. She had not packed it. She had thought about it in the mornings, standing in front of it with her hands at her sides, running the numbers the way she ran all numbers, methodically, without sentiment. The pass would stay open 11 more days. She had enough saved to take the stage as far as Missoula. From Missoula, a person could go in several directions. She had not packed the trunk. The notebook was on the crate she used as a nightstand, closed, the leather darkened at the spine from handling. The Edelweiss was still inside it. She had not moved it. The wind came up from the south and moved across the finished roof without catching anywhere. Nothing to catch on. She had seen to that. She put both hands flat on the cedar on either side of her and felt the warmth the noon sun had worked into the wood. It was the same warmth as new split timber in a workshop in Bavaria, in a different life, in a year she did not let herself think about too directly. She left her hands where they were. Below, she heard the workshop door open. She heard his boots than the situation required. She did not turn. He came up over the eave and crossed to where she was sitting, the peaked ridge at his back, the town below beginning to lose its edges in the early dusk. He was carrying 2 cups. She saw them in her peripheral vision. Tin cups, the same 2 from the workshop shelf, the ones the girl had stopped asking about because she already knew where they lived. He lowered himself beside her without comment, set 1 cup on the cedar between them. She picked it up with both hands. The coffee was still hot. She could feel it through the tin. She held it and looked out across Harlan's Crossing, which was settling into the hour the way it always did. The general store going dark first, then the livery, then the thin yellow squares of the houses along the north side of the street, coming on one at a time. He drank from his own cup. Below, she heard the girl's voice, brief and high, somewhere in the yard. Then the workshop door, and then quiet. The trunk was in the loft. The notebook was on the crate beside it. The Edelweiss was still between the last 2 pages, and she had not moved it, and she was not going to move it, and she understood now that she had known this for some time, had known it the way she knew a joint was true before she checked it with the square, because the feeling was not hope but recognition. She had not packed the trunk. The first star appeared over the ridge to the east, then a second. She had watched this same ridge for 41 evenings, and she knew the order they came in. The ridge first, then the low cluster above the pass, then the rest of the sky, all at once when the light finally let go. She waited for it. He was still beside her. His shoulder was 6 inches from hers. He had not moved, and she had not moved, and the finished roof held them both, without any give at all. Cedar and cut nail, and 41 days of work, solid as anything she had ever built. The light let go. The sky came in all at once, vast and cold and depthless, the way Montana sky came in, and she breathed out slowly, both hands still around the cup, and felt the warmth of it against her palms. 11 days before the first hard freeze. She did not pick up her traveling bag. The stars came,